The chipped formica of the diner booth felt cold under Rusty S. forearms. 3:17 a.m. He should be asleep, prepping for the dawn patrol. Instead, he was nursing lukewarm coffee and trying to piece together a plausible lie. Rough night, Mabel. The diner, owner, and unofficial keeper of the town secrets. Didn't he wait for an answer? Her gaze, sharp as broken glass, already knew. Rusty managed a tired smile. Just lost track of time. Poker night with the boys, Mabel snorted, wiping down the counter with a practiced hand. Poker night at the Silver Spur, that is a new one. Haven T seen your truck in the lot for months. And last I heard, Earl's been playing Hold M with Father Michael. He forced a chuckle. Earl was under the weather. We moved the game to Jake Henderson. Another local, a retired logger with a reputation for discretion toying and a basement full of questionable activities. It was the best he could do on short notice. Mabel just raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. You look like you wrestled a bear and the bear won. Just tired, Rusty insisted, pushing the coffee cup around in small circles. The truth at 10 a streak of bad luck at the tables, fueled by a desperate attempt to recoup losses. The tea tasted like ash in his mouth. He'd been chasing a win for months, digging a hole deeper with every hand. The Silver Spur wasn't about fun anymore. It was about staying afloat. You Rangers have a tough job, Mabel conceded, softening slightly. Keeping the tourists safe and the bears out of trouble. Don't let a little poker ruin your focus. Rusty mumbled his thanks, paid, and slipped back into the pre-dawn chill. The lie felt heavier than usual. He didn't. Just risk-looking fooled Ranger Rusty Albright, celebrated for his tracking skills and unflinching dedication, known for a squeaky, clean record. He was risking everything. Losing his badge meant losing control. And losing control was something he couldn't afford. Not right now. He was barely 10 minutes into his patrol route when he got the call. Dispatch, a flat voice crackling through the radio. Ranger Albright. We've got a hiker reporting something unusual. Elk Meadow says it is a kill, but messy, he is shaken up, Rusty. Gut tightened. Elk Meadow was a popular spot, easily accessible from the main visitor center. A dead elk wasn't unheard of. Timid mountain lions, bears, even a rogue wolf occasionally wandered into the park. But messy didn't sit right. Rangers saw their share of carnage, but they were accustomed to the brutal, chaotic violence of nature. This sounded different. He flipped on his lights, the beams cutting through the lingering darkness. The park, usually alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, was eerily silent. He patrolled these woods for 8 years and had never felt this. Empty. The hiker, a young woman named Sarah Jenkins, was waiting near the trailhead, her face pale and drawn. She kept glancing nervously into the trees, clutching a half-empty water bottle. Ranger, she said, her voice trembling. It is, back there. I almost didn't believe it myself. Rusty followed her along the path, his hand resting on the sidearm holstered at his hip. The air grew colder, the scent of pine and damp earth mingling with something else sooty, something metallic and sickeningly sweet. Then he saw it. The elk lay in a small clearing partially obscured by ferns. It wasn't the brutal, tearing wounds he expected from a predator. This was precise. The animal's flank had been opened, the incision clean and deep, as if made with a surgeon's scalpel. There were no claw marks, no tooth punctures, just smooth, almost surgical cuts. Rusty knelt, carefully examining the wound. The flesh had been meticulously parted, revealing muscle tissue and bone. It wasn't a haphazard attack. It was deliberate. He ran a gloved hand over the smooth edges of the cut, his stomach churning. What happened? Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Rusty didn't answer. He didn't know what happened. He'd seen the work of predators, bears ripping apart carcasses, coyotes scavenging leftovers. This was something else entirely. This felt wrong. He stood, scanning the surrounding woods. There were no tracks, no sign of a struggle, just an unsettling silence, broken only by the distant chirping of birds. Stay here, he told Sarah, his voice clipped and professional. I need to take some photos and report this, he radioed dispatch. requesting backup and a wildlife biologist. The report he dictated was carefully worded, omitting the unsettling precision of the wounds. He couldn't explain it, not yet. It sounded insane, even to his own ears. "Ranger Albright, what do you think did this?" Dispatch asked. "Unknown at this time," he replied. "Possible bear attack, but the wounds are unusual. We need a thorough investigation." By the time he finished the report, two other rangers, Miller and Reyes Tuin, had arrived. Both were veterans, experienced and unflappable. But even they were taken aback by the sight. "What in the hell?" Miller muttered, staring at the elk. "Looks like a textbook case of a bear attack, right?" Reyes asked, though her voice lacked conviction. Rusty shook his head. "Not exactly. Look at the cuts. They read too clean. Too precise. No tearing, no shredding. It is almost like someone used a knife." Reyes scoffed. "A knife? Come on, Rusty. You are reaching. We're talking about a wild animal here." "I am just saying," Rusty insisted. "It doesn't add up." The news spread quickly through the ranger station, sparking disbelief and unease. Theories ranged from a rogue mountain lion with exceptionally sharp claws to a particularly aggressive bear. But no one could shake the nagging feeling that something was deeply wrong. Rusty tried to focus on the practicalities, securing the area, collecting evidence. But the image of the elk's wounds kept replaying in his mind. The precision, the lack of struggle, the unnerving silence. It felt like a violation of something fundamental, a perversion of the natural order. He retreated to his office, a cramped space filled with maps, reports, and the lingering scent of pine. He needed to clear his head, to make sense of what he'd seen. But the unsettling feeling persisted, a cold knot in his stomach. His phone buzzed, breaking his concentration. He glanced at the display, a blocked number. He knew who it was. He hesitated for a moment, then answered. "What do you want, Sal?" he asked, his voice tight. "Just checking in, Rusty," Sal DeMarco's voice dripped with mock concern. "Heard you've been having a little bad luck lately. The Silver Spur ain't been treating you kindly, huh?" Sal was a bookie, one of many Rusty had foolishly turned to in a moment of desperation. He was a master of veiled threats, a collector of debts who didn't play by the rules. "I told you I'll have the money," Rusty said, forcing himself to remain calm. "That is what you said last week, Rusty, and the week before that. The interest is piling up. You know how this works." "I am good for it," Rusty insisted, his jaw clenched. "Give me a little more time." Sal laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Time is money, Rusty, and you are running out of both. You are a smart guy, a respected ranger. Don't throw it all away over a few bad hands." "Just leave me alone," Rusty growled. "Oh, I will, Rusty," Sal replied, his voice softening to a sinister whisper. "Once you pay up, but let me give you a friendly piece of advice. Sometimes the things you think, aren't the whole story. Some debts are best left unpaid." He hung up, leaving Rusty staring at the phone, his hand trembling. The threat was clear. Sal wasn't just interested in the money. He was sending a message. He knew about Rusty's gambling problem, about his desperation. He knew he had something to lose. Rusty rubbed his temples, trying to stave off a headache. The elk, the strange wounds, Sal's threats. It was all connected somehow. He felt it in his gut. He just couldn't see how. He had a park to protect, a reputation to uphold, and a debt to pay. He walked outside, back towards the elk meadow, needing to see it again. The sun was beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the trees. The silence was still there, oppressive and unsettling. He knelt beside the elk, examining the wound once more. This time, he noticed something he'd missed before. Small, almost invisible markings around the edges of the incision. He pulled out his magnifying glass, his hands shaking slightly. The markings weren't random. They weren't the result of a struggle or a predator. Claws, they were symbols, intricate, geometric patterns carved into the flesh. With an almost surgical precision, Rusty's blood ran cold. This wasn't the work of an animal. This wasn't even the work of a human wielding a knife. It was something else, something far more disturbing, something he didn't understand. A primal fear took root within him. Something Swain wanted him to see them. He reached out to photograph the markings. As he adjusted the lens on his camera, he saw something glinting in the morning light embedded deep within the elk, as open wound sue a small metallic object, partially obscured by tissue. He carefully extracted it. It wasn't a knife. It wasn't a natural object. It was a microchip. The smell hit Rusty before he even reached the bison. Not the familiar, earthy scent of the herd, but that same metallic sweetness he'd encountered at Elk Meadow Thoen, a scent that clung to the back of his throat like a bad omen. Dispatch had received a call from a group of tourists near the Geyser Basin. A bison down and unresponsive. Rusty hadn't wanted to believe it was connected to the elk, hadn't wanted to acknowledge the chilling pattern forming in his mind. But as he crested the rise, the sight confirmed his worst fears. The bison lay sprawled in the thermal flats, its massive frame dwarfed by the steaming vents. Like the elk, it hadn't been torn apart by a predator, it had been dissected. The same precise incisions, the same unnerving cleanliness. The animal's abdomen had been opened with an almost surgical skill, revealing the intricate network of organs beneath. Ranger Reyes was already on scene, her face grim. "Another one, Rusty. Same Mo, this is beyond messed up." "Any sign of tracks?" Rusty asked, knowing the answer before he heard it. "Nothing, just the bison's own footprints, leading to where it collapsed. No drag marks, no sign of a struggle. It is like it just let it happen." The tourists were huddled together, whispering amongst themselves, their faces pale with shock. The Geyser Basin, usually a playground of wonder, had become a scene of macabre fascination. Rusty quickly ordered them back to the visitor center, trying to minimize the panic. "What do you think it is?" Reyes asked, her voice low. "A rogue hunter with some kind of obsession." Rusty shook his head. "Too precise for a hunter. And why leave no tracks? It doesn't make sense. Maybe it is a cult practicing animal surgery." Rusty scoffed. "Come on, Reyes, let's stick to facts." But the facts were disturbingly sparse, pointing to something beyond rational explanation. Rumors flew around the ranger station like wildfire. A disturbed veteran practicing field surgery. Illegal organ harvesting for the black market. Even whispers of a mythical creature, resurrected from the park's shadowy corners. The increased foot traffic and worried whispers from tourists only amplified the anxiety. Park Supervisor Evans called an emergency meeting, his face etched with worry. "We need to control the narrative. We can't let this escalate into a full-blown panic." "But what 2x going on, Supervisor?" Rusty asked, his voice laced with frustration. "We have 2 mutilated animals, no leads, and a growing sense of dread. We need to investigate this properly." Evans sighed. "I've contacted the state wildlife authorities. They're sending a team to assist. In the meantime, let's focus on maintaining order and reassuring the public." Rusty knew that meant burying the strange details, downplaying the unsettling precision of the wounds. It meant prioritizing public perception over the truth, and that ate at him. He needed an outside perspective, someone who wasn't constrained by protocol or political concerns. Someone who might entertain the possibility of something unconventional. That is how he ended up driving to a remote cabin nestled deep in the woods, a plume of wood smoke curling lazily from its chimney. It was the home of Dr. Aris Thorne. Thorne was a wildlife biologist, but she was known for her eccentric theories. She'd spent years studying the behavioral patterns of wolves, claiming they possessed a level of intelligence and emotional complexity far beyond scientific consensus. She also had a fascination with local folklore and a reputation for challenging conventional wisdom. Most of the park staff considered her a harmless kook, but Rusty was desperate. Thorne answered the door, her dark eyes scrutinizing him with unsettling intensity. She was a small woman, wiry and weathered, with a tangled mane of gray hair and hands stained with dirt. "Ranger Albright," she said, her voice raspy. "I was wondering when you'd come. I've been expecting you." Rusty led her to his truck, where he downloaded the crime scene photos. He showed her the images of the elk and the bison, bracing himself for her reaction. Thorne studied the photos in silence, her brow furrowed in concentration. She didn't gasp, didn't offer platitudes. She simply observed, "The cleanliness is what is most disturbing," she said finally. Her voice barely a whisper, the precision. This isn't the work of a predator, and it is certainly not the work of a human with a scalpel, not in the traditional sense. What do you mean? Rusty asked, his heart pounding. Look at the edges of the incisions, Thorne said, pointing to the images. They're almost cauterized, as if sealed with heat. There is no excessive bleeding, no tissue damage beyond what is necessary. It is as if the animal was operated on by someone toin something, or something toin with a complete understanding of anatomy. You think it is something supernatural? Rusty asked. The words feeling ridiculous even as he spoke them. Thorne didn't answer directly. The natural world is full of mysteries, Ranger. Things we don't understand. Things we dismiss as impossible because they don't fit our preconceived notions. Rusty felt a surge of frustration. He needed concrete answers, not philosophical musings. Doctor, with all due respect, I need something I can work with. Are you saying this is something we've never seen before? I'm saying we've forgotten what we've seen, Thorne replied cryptically. There are stories, Ranger, old stories. Stories the Park Service likes to keep buried. What stories? Thorne led him inside her cabin, a cluttered space overflowing with books, specimens, and strange artifacts. She gestured towards a worn leather-bound tome resting on a dusty table. These lands, they have a history that predates the park, predates the settlers. The Native American tribes who lived here for centuries spoke of beings, shapeshifters, creatures who could take the form of animals. She opened the book, revealing intricate drawings of animalistic figures with human features. They called them skinwalkers, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Beings who could mimic the form of any creature, who could move between worlds. They were said to inhabit the remote areas of the park, preying on the unwary and disrupting the natural order. Legend had it they took organs as trophies. Rusty stared at the drawings, feeling a chill creep up his spine. He'd heard whispers of the Skinwalker legend before, dismissed it as folklore, as campfire stories told to scare tourists. But Thorne's earnestness, combined with the inexplicable nature of the mutilations, made him uneasy. You're saying you think a skinwalker is responsible for this? He asked, trying to keep the skepticism from his voice. Thorne shrugged. I'm saying it is a possibility, a remote one perhaps, but a possibility nonetheless. This park is built on a confluence of natural energies, a place where the veil between worlds is thin. I've felt it for years. Rusty felt a headache building. He needed facts, evidence, something he could present to his superiors. A monster from Native American folklore wasn't going to cut it. Thank you for your time, Dr. Thorne, he said, standing up. I'll keep your insights in mind. He left the cabin feeling more confused and unsettled than ever. The Skinwalker legend felt absurd, yet it offered a chilling explanation for the inexplicable. He didn't believe in monsters, but he couldn't deny the growing sense that something sinister was lurking in the shadows. He decided to try one last gamble, one last desperate attempt to dig himself out of debt. He drove straight to the Silver Spur, hoping for a lucky streak. But luck was not on his side. He lost everything. Every dollar he had left, plus a generous line of credit from Sal DeMarco. As he stumbled out of the casino, defeated and humiliated, Sal was waiting for him. He was flanked by two hulking figures who looked like they'd been carved from granite. Looks like you're having another rough night, Rusty, Sal said, his voice dripping with malice. I need some time, Rusty stammered. Sal laughed. Time is up, Ranger. You've burned through all your chances. You owe me a considerable amount of money, and I want it now. Just give me until payday, Rusty pleaded. Payday. Sal sneered. You think the Park Service is going to bail you out? You think they'd tolerate a gambling addict on their payroll? You are a sick joke, Rusty, he indicated toward his two goons. Maybe a little persuasion is needed. I warned you, Sal said, stepping closer. Some debts are best left unpaid, he paused, his eyes glinting in the dim light. But there are other ways to settle accounts, he leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper. Let's just say I have some friends who might be interested in your little investigation, people who wouldn't mind seeing you distracted. Or disappeared. Rusty's heart hammered against his ribs. He was trapped between a mythical monster in the wilderness and a very real threat in the form of Sal DeMarco. His world was collapsing around him. Then his radio crackled to life. Ranger Albright, urgent. We've got another one. Geyser Basin, it is different this time. There is something pinwine written on its flank. The message on the elk, S flank, was in T carved into the flesh. It was tubed burned in, and seared into the hide with an unnerving precision. A spiraling symbol, unlike anything Rusty had ever seen, radiating outwards like a malignant sun. It wasn't T merely a marking. It felt like a brand. "This isn't T random anymore," he said, his voice grim. He stood beside Dr. Thorne, both of them staring down at the latest victim, a young female elk found barely 100 yards from the Geyser Basin Visitor Center. Someone, or something, is sending a message. Thorne ran a gloved hand over the symbol, her face etched with concern. The heat source had to be intense focused. This wasn't T done with a torch. It is almost as if it was created with energy. The third mutilation, coupled with a frantic report from a tourist claiming to have seen a tall, shadowy figure moving among the trees, was the final straw. Supervisor Evans, his face ashen, initiated a wide lockdown. All visitors and staff are to remain in designated shelters. His voice boomed over the park's emergency broadcast system. No one is to leave. Repeat, no one is to leave. This is not a drill. The park, normally a bustling hub of activity, descended into an eerie silence. The gates were sealed, the roads blocked, and hundreds of people were forced to huddle in visitor centers, lodges, and even their cars waiting for instructions. The sheer scale of Yellowstone, over 2.2 million acres, made a comprehensive search impossible. Rangers were stretched thin, confined to patrol routes, attempting to maintain order and reassure a growing number of frightened visitors. Rusty and Thorne, granted special access due to the nature of the investigation, continued to examine the mutilation sites. Each carcass yielded the same disturbing patterns: the surgical precision of the wounds, the absence of tracks, the unnerving silence, and now the branded symbols, appearing on each victim with an ominous regularity. "These symbols, they re not Native American," Thorne said, sketching the spiral in her notebook. "I've spent years studying indigenous art and mythology. This is something else, older, more primal." "Do you recognize them from anywhere?" Rusty asked, his hope dwindling with each unanswered question. Thorne shook her head. "I've seen fragments of similar glyphs in obscure texts, ancient grimoires detailing forgotten rituals, but they've never been presented in this context. It is like a warped, corrupted version of something truly ancient." Back at the visitor center, the atmosphere was turning volatile. Confined spaces, limited resources, and a growing sense of fear were fueling minor conflicts. Arguments erupted over food and space. Rumors spread like wildfire. Amplified by the lack of official information, panic threatened to overwhelm the carefully constructed facade of calm. Ranger Miller, visibly stressed, reported a near brawl in the cafeteria. "People are starting to freak out, Rusty. They want answers, and we don't have any." "Just maintain order, Miller," Rusty said, forcing a calm tone. "We'll get through this." But he didn't believe his own words. He retreated to a quiet corner of the visitor center, attempting to make sense of the chaos. He needed a breakthrough, a clue, anything that could point them in the right direction. He pulled out his phone, hoping for a sign of service, but the signal remained stubbornly weak. Then a text message, an anonymous number, asterisk, "Enjoying the lockdown, Ranger. Seems your little problem is catching up to you. Wouldn't T want your secrets to become public knowledge, would you?" Some Rusty's blood ran cold. Sal, or someone working for him. Someone knew about his gambling debt, about his desperation. Someone was deliberately trying to destabilize him, to exploit his vulnerability. He deleted the message, his hands trembling. He couldn't afford to be distracted by Sal's threats. He had a park to protect, a mystery to solve. But the message had planted a seed of paranoia, whispering doubts in his ear. Who else knew? How deep did Sal's reach extend? "Something wrong, Rusty?" Thorne asked, appearing beside him. She'd been watching him, her dark eyes perceptive and unwavering. "Just a false alarm," Rusty said, forcing a smile. He was about to share his personal demons with her. "Not yet." "You seem distracted," Thorne said, her voice gentle. Whatever it is, you can tell me. Rusty hesitated. He was a private person, accustomed to shouldering his burdens alone, but Thorne's unnerving intuition made him uneasy. He felt like she could see right through him. It is nothing, he insisted. Just the stress of the situation. Thorne didn't press the issue, but her gaze lingered on him, filled with unspoken questions. Determined to regain control, Rusty suggested they revisit the first mutilation site, Elk Meadow. He had a hunch, a gut feeling that they'd overlooked something. There was something about that clearing, he said. An odd energy. I need to take another look. The woods felt different under the shroud of the lockdown. The usual sounds of wildlife were muted, replaced by an unnerving silence. The trees seemed to watch them, their branches twisting into grotesque shapes. They spent hours combing the area around Elk Meadow, searching for any sign of a hidden trail. A discarded object, anything that could offer a clue. Then, Thorne stopped abruptly, her eyes fixed on a patch of dense undergrowth. "There is something here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She pushed aside the branches, revealing a narrow opening in the hillside. Hidden behind a curtain of vines, a cave. Rusty pulled out his flashlight, shining it into the darkness. The cave was small, but it smelled ancient, musty, and strangely metallic. "Be careful," Thorne said, her voice tense. "This doesn't feel right." They cautiously entered the cave, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The walls were covered in the same spiraling symbols they'd found on the elk and the bison. But these were more elaborate, more intricate, accompanied by other disturbing glyphs that seemed to writhe and shift in the flickering light. In the center of the cave, they found an altar made of rough, hewn stone. On the altar lay a collection of strange artifacts in animal skulls, dried herbs, feathers, and small, intricately carved wooden figures. Rusty's flashlight beam landed on something that made his stomach clench. A scattering of bone fragments, stained with a dark, viscous substance. Not animal bones, human bones. "What is this place?" Rusty breathed, his voice filled with dread. Thorne knelt beside the altar, examining the artifacts with a horrified expression. "This isn't just a cave, Ranger. This is a shrine, a place of ritual, and judging by these bones, a place of sacrifice." She pointed to a small, leather-bound book lying on the altar. "Look at this." Rusty picked up the book, flipping through its yellowed pages. It was written in a language he didn't recognize, filled with cryptic symbols and disturbing illustrations. "What does it say?" he asked. Thorne's face was pale. "It is a compendium of dark magic, a manual for summoning ancient entities. It speaks of a return, a renewal, a sacrifice to appease the old gods." As she spoke, a gust of wind swept through the cave, extinguishing their flashlights. They were plunged into darkness, the only sound the frantic beating of their hearts. Then, a voice echoed from the depths of the cave, a raspy, guttural voice that seemed to claw its way into their minds. "You should not have come here." The darkness in the cave felt alive, pressing in on Rusty and Thorne, thick and suffocating. It wasn't simply the absence of light. It was a weight, a presence that prickled at the back of his neck. Thorne fumbled for her lighter, the small flame revealing her face pale and drawn. Rusty reactivated his flashlight, the beam trembling in his hand. "Did you hear that?" Thorne whispered, her voice barely audible above the thumping of his own heart. Rusty scanned the cave but saw nothing. "It must have been the wind," he said, trying to sound reassuring. But he didn't believe it. The voice hadn't sounded natural, hadn't sounded human. They retreated from the cave, scrambling over the rough terrain, desperate to escape the oppressive atmosphere. Back in his truck, Rusty radioed for backup, requesting a thorough search of the area. "Anything, Ranger?" Dispatch asked, his voice laced with concern. "We found a cave," Rusty replied, carefully omitting the details about the altar and the bones. Possible evidence related to the mutilations. Requesting a full forensic sweep, he knew he couldn't trust the NPS with the full truth. He suspected any mention of rituals or ancient artifacts would be met with skepticism and bureaucratic stonewalling. Thorne, meanwhile, was already immersed in research. Her laptop illuminated in the dim light of the visitor center. She'd been scouring historical texts, combing through databases of Native American folklore and mythology. "I've found something," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "The symbols, they belong to the Etsina Odi, a forgotten tribe that inhabited this area centuries ago." "Forgotten how?" Rusty asked, leaning over her shoulder. "Wiped out," Thorne explained grimly. "A smallpox epidemic decimated their population in the late 1800s. But before that, they were known for their unusual practices. They worshipped ancient entities, practiced blood sacrifice, and believed in a world beyond our understanding." She showed him a faded illustration from an old ethnological journal. It depicted Etsina Odi shamans performing a ritual, their faces painted with eerie symbols. The illustration bore a striking resemblance to the glyphs they found in the cave. "They were said to be able to shapeshift, to commune with the spirits of animals," Thorne continued. "Legends claim they could walk between worlds, becoming one with the creatures they revered." Rusty felt a shiver crawl down his spine. The Skinwalker legend, was it more than just a myth? Could there be a connection between the Etsina Odi and the current events? As Thorne continued her research, Rusty delved into the park's archives, hoping to find some historical precedent for the mutilations. He spent hours sifting through dusty files, poring over old ranger reports and incident logs, and he found something. A series of reports dating back to the 1950s, detailing similar animal mutilations in the same area of the park. The reports had been classified, labeled sensitive, tonty, potential public relations issue. The NPs had covered it up. The reports described the same surgical precision, the same lack of tracks, the same unnerving silence. They even mentioned rumors of strange symbols appearing on the animals' carcasses, but the investigations had stalled. The cases eventually closed with vague explanations: fied rogue predators, natural causes. "They tried to bury it," Rusty muttered, his voice filled with anger. "They didn't want anyone to know." He closed his eyes, and a fragmented memory surfaced, a flash of a rainy night, a darkened forest, a desperate struggle. His father, a park ranger himself, kneeling beside a wounded deer, his face etched with grief. He'd been too young to understand what was happening, but he remembered the fear, the helplessness. The memory was blurred, distorted, but it resonated with a deep, primal pain. He de-channeled that pain into recklessness, into a need for control. The gambling had started small, a harmless distraction, but it had quickly spiraled into an obsession, a desperate attempt to numb the emptiness within. He de-lost everything 40, his savings, his relationships, his peace of mind. The urge to escape, to forget, to chase the fleeting thrill of a win was almost overwhelming. His thoughts were interrupted by a frantic radio call. "All units, we have a problem. Ranger Davies is missing. Last contact was 2 hours ago. He was on a routine patrol near Black Sand Basin." Ranger Davies, a young, enthusiastic ranger recently transferred from Yosemite. He was well-liked, dependable, and a by-the-book officer. His disappearance sent a wave of panic through the lockdown. "A search party is being assembled," dispatch announced. "All available personnel are to report to Black Sand Basin immediately." Rusty S. gut twisted with dread. The mutilations, the cave, the covered-up reports in Tuin. It was all spiraling towards something dark and dangerous. And now, a ranger was missing. He knew he could count on the NPS to handle this properly. He needed information, and he needed it fast. Desperate, he reached for his phone and dialed Sal DeMarco's number. "You are a busy man, Ranger," Sal said, his voice dripping with smugness. "I need a favor," Rusty said, his voice tight. "I need information about anyone who has been asking questions about the park." "About the recent incidents," Sal chuckled. "Information comes at a price, Rusty, a hefty price." "I don't have any money," Rusty said, bracing himself for the inevitable. "Oh, I think you do," Sal said, his voice turning menacing. "You have something much more valuable, your silence. You continue to look the other way when I offer opportunities. You think I won extract a price, Ranger." He offered Rusty a deal. Sal would provide information about potential leads, individuals who might be involved, in exchange for Rusty turning a blind eye to a specific shipment passing through the park under his jurisdiction. It was a clear violation of his oath, a betrayal of everything he stood for. Rusty hesitated. He was walking a dangerous line, selling his soul to the devil, but he could afford to fail. Not now. Not with a park full of people locked down, a missing ranger, and a growing sense of dread hanging over everything. "What is the shipment?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "That is not your concern, Ranger. Your concern is to make sure it passes through without interruption. Understand?" Rusty nodded, a knot of shame tightening in his chest. "I understand." Sal provided a name: Fuin Elias Vance, a recluse who lived in a remote cabin near Obsidian Cliff, known for his eccentric behavior and rumored interest in the occult. He'd been seen in the park several times in the past week, asking questions about the local folklore and the Atsina Odi tribe. "He has been poking around near the Old Faithful Winter Road closure," Sal said. "Specifically, looking for access to a section of the park that is off limits. People call it Devil's Throat. Devil's Throat." Rusty asked, "An old legend. Locals say it is a place of dark energy. A gateway to another world, supposedly. The Atsina Odi used to perform rituals there." Sal paused. Ranger Davies was last assigned to patrol that area. The air in Obsidian Meadow crackled with an unnatural energy. The black, glassy obsidian formations seemed to absorb the light, casting long, distorted shadows. The ground felt warm beneath Rusty's boots, radiating a subtle heat that belied the chilling atmosphere. He and Thorn moved cautiously, their weapons drawn, the silence broken only by the crunch of gravel beneath their feet. "This place, it feels wrong," Thorn whispered, her eyes scanning the desolate landscape. "Like something is watching us," Rusty nodded, sharing her unease. Devil's Throat, the secluded area Vance had been seeking, was a narrow canyon carved into the obsidian bedrock. It was said to be a place of immense geothermal activity, where the Earth's energy flowed freely. But it felt like more than that. It felt sacred and violated. They found Vance near the entrance to the canyon, surrounded by a bizarre arrangement of stones, bones, and feathers. He was chanting in a guttural language, his face painted with the same spiraling symbols they'd seen on the mutilated animals. He didn't react to their presence, lost in the fervor of his ritual. "Elias Vance, you're under arrest," Rusty shouted, his voice echoing through the canyon. Vance slowly turned, his eyes burning with a fanatical intensity. He wasn't what Rusty expected, not a hardened criminal, but a gaunt, haunted man, consumed by grief and desperation. "You don't understand," Vance said, his voice raspy. "I'm not trying to cause harm. I'm trying to restore balance, to heal the earth. By mutilating animals and terrorizing people." Thorn retorted, her voice sharp. "They desecrated this land," Vance said, gesturing towards the obsidian formations. "The white man came and stole it from my ancestors, destroyed our way of life. They forgot the old ways, the connection to the spirits of this place. The land is sick, dying. I'm trying to awaken the Guardian." "To heal the wound, the Guardian?" Rusty asked, his hand tightening on his weapon. "The spirit of Yellowstone," Vance replied. "The ancient entity that dwells beneath the surface. My ancestors knew how to appease it, how to maintain the balance, but the knowledge was lost. Buried with the tribe." "You're delusional," Rusty said, trying to reason with him. "This isn't healing, this is madness." Vance let out a chilling laugh. "Madness? No, Ranger, this is remembering. This is reclaiming what was stolen from us." He snatched a bone-handled knife from a nearby stone and lunged at Rusty. The fight was brutal, chaotic. Vance was surprisingly strong, fueled by a desperate zealotry. He fought with a wild abandon, ignoring Rusty's attempts to disarm him. The obsidian ground offered little footing, and they both slipped and stumbled, trading blows in the confined space. Rusty managed to deliver a solid punch to Vance's jaw, sending him reeling backwards. But Vance recovered quickly, slashing at Rusty's arm with the knife. The blade sliced through his sleeve, drawing a line of crimson on his skin. Thorn, meanwhile, was frantically examining the arrangement of stones and bones. "Rusty, the symbols. They're not random. They're part of a complex ritual, a summoning circle." "What are you talking about?" Rusty grunted, blocking another attack from Vance. "He is trying to awaken something," Thorn shouted. "Something powerful, something ancient. As the fight raged on, fragments of Rusty's past began to surface. A rain-soaked forest, his father's reassuring voice. The smell of pine needles and damp earth. Then a scream, a flash of red. His father, lying motionless on the ground, his face contorted in pain. The memory was clear now, no longer fragmented. He hadn't understood it as a child, but now he knew. His father hadn't died in a simple accident. He'd been investigating a similar incident, a series of animal mutilations, a strange energy emanating from the same area of the park. He'd gotten too close to the truth. The revelation fueled Rusty's rage. Giving him a surge of adrenaline, he disarmed Vance, sending the knife clattering against the obsidian rocks. He pinned Vance to the ground, his knee pressed into his chest. "Tell me what you're doing," Rusty demanded, his voice trembling with fury. "I'm opening the gate," Vance gasped, his eyes wide with desperation. "I'm awakening the Guardian. It will cleanse this land, restore the balance." Thorn, having deciphered the arrangement of the symbols, shouted, "He is using the geothermal activity of the canyon as a conduit. He is amplifying the Earth's energy, creating a focal point for the awakening. He is trying to tap into the Yellowstone caldera," she continued, her voice rising in alarm. "A massive supervolcano lying dormant beneath the surface. If he succeeds, it could trigger catastrophic consequences." Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. The canyon walls rumbled, and the air crackled with an even more intense energy. Steam erupted from the vents, billowing into the sky. Vance, struggling against Rusty's weight, began to chant again, his voice growing louder, more frenzied. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small obsidian amulet. Holding it aloft, he began to spin it, faster and faster. "The cycle is complete," he screamed. "The Guardian rises." The amulet began to glow with an eerie green light. The geothermal activity in the canyon escalated. Reaching a fever pitch, the vents spewed superheated water and steam, creating a deafening roar. Then Old Faithful, the park's most iconic geyser, began to erupt, but it wasn't the normal, predictable eruption. This was something different, more violent, more powerful. A column of scalding water and steam shot hundreds of feet into the air, dwarfing everything around it. And within the geyser's plume, a shape began to form. A monstrous shape, shifting and swirling, coalescing from the steam and the geothermal energy. A creature of immense size and power. With glowing red eyes and a serpentine body, the Guardian had awakened, and it was furious. The transformation was horrifying. Vance's body contorted and elongated, his limbs twisting into unnatural angles. His skin cracked and hardened, taking on the texture of obsidian. The light from the geyser illuminated his newly formed features, scaled hide, gleaming claws, and a maw filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. He was no longer Elias Vance. He was a vessel, a grotesque animation of the entity's will. Rusty, despite the searing pain in his arm, reacted instinctively. Years of training kicked in, honed by a lifetime spent navigating the dangers of Yellowstone. He rolled away from the transformed Vance, scrambling to his feet. "Thorn, disrupt the ritual," he yelled, his voice barely audible above the roaring geyser and the creature's guttural growls. Thorn, her face pale but determined, was already working, attempting to dismantle the stone arrangement Vance had created. She ripped stones from their positions, disrupting the flow of energy, trying to sever the connection between the entity and the geothermal activity. But the creature was too powerful. It swatted Thorn aside with a casual flick of its clawed hand, sending her flying into a pile of rocks. Rusty lunged forward, firing his sidearm at the creature. But the bullets seemed to have little effect, bouncing harmlessly off its hardened hide. He knew he couldn't fight it head-on. He needed to use his knowledge of the terrain to exploit its weaknesses. He remembered his father's teachings, the importance of understanding the park, of becoming one with its landscape. He led the creature towards a series of jagged obsidian formations, weaving between the sharp edges, using his agility to avoid its attacks. He knew the area well, knew the hidden crevices and unstable ground. He led it towards a narrow pass, hoping to force it into a confined space. The park around them was descending into chaos. Geysers erupted in unexpected locations, sending plumes of scalding water and steam into the air. The ground trembled violently, throwing visitors and rangers to the ground. Panic reigned supreme. Rusty utilized the terrain to his advantage. Scaling the obsidian formations, leaping across chasms, always staying one step ahead of the creature. He knew he couldn't defeat it, not with conventional weapons. He needed to sever the connection to the entity, to disrupt the ritual at its source. He spotted Thorn, bruised and shaken, still attempting to dismantle the arrangement. He knew she was his only hope. He had to protect her, give her time to complete her task. He lured the creature towards Thorn, then, at the last moment, sidestepped, allowing it to stumble into a cluster of precariously balanced obsidian pillars. The pillars toppled, creating a small avalanche of rock and debris, momentarily disorienting the creature. Seizing the opportunity, Rusty charged, tackling the creature to the ground. He wrestled with it, struggling to maintain his grip, the creature's immense strength threatening to overwhelm him. He managed to reach for the obsidian amulet, still clutched in its clawed hand. It pulsed with a malevolent energy, burning his skin with its touch. He ripped it free, feeling a surge of power flow through his body. The creature roared in agony, its form flickering and unstable. Thorn, her hands bleeding, finally managed to dismantle the last of the stones. A shock wave of energy rippled through the canyon, and the geyser's eruption began to subside. The creature's movements grew sluggish, its form shrinking, reverting back to Vance. But the process wasn't clean. Vance's body was ravaged, scarred, marked by the entity's presence. He collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, his eyes vacant and unfocused. Rusty, exhausted and bleeding, stumbled towards Thorn, helping her to her feet. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Thorn nodded weakly, "For now. But the energy signature is still there, dormant but present. We need to monitor it closely." The park slowly began to regain a semblance of order. The geysers subsided, the tremors ceased, and the emergency teams began to evacuate the visitors. But the damage had been done. Fear and uncertainty hung heavy in the air. Rusty sat beside Vance, who was now unconscious, his body guarded by two rangers. He felt a strange mix of pity and revulsion. He understood the man's desperation, his grief, his misguided attempt to restore what he'd lost. He'd seen that same desperation in his father's eyes, felt the weight of that same loss. "He has been carrying this for generations," a park psychiatrist said, examining Vance. "His family has a long history of mental illness, tied to the legend of the Atsina Odi. They believe they were chosen to protect the park, to appease the spirits." He felt compelled to finish what his ancestors started. "He nearly destroyed Yellowstone," Rusty said, his voice filled with sorrow. "He was a broken man," the psychiatrist replied, driven by pain, fueled by a desperate hope. "He wasn't a monster, Ranger, just a lost soul." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across Obsidian Meadow, Rusty noticed something he hadn't seen before. A patch of disturbed earth near the base of one of the obsidian formations. He knelt down, brushing away the loose gravel. Beneath the surface, he discovered a hidden opening, concealed by a cleverly disguised slab of obsidian. It led downward, into darkness. "Thorn," he called, his voice hushed. "I think you need to see this." Thorn joined him, shining her flashlight into the opening. It revealed a narrow passage, leading into what appeared to be a hidden chamber. "What is it?" she asked, her voice filled with apprehension. Rusty hesitated, a sense of unease washing over him. He knew with a chilling certainty that this was just the beginning. "I don't know," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "but I have a feeling it is something much older, much deeper than we ever imagined. It is like the park itself is hiding something." He braced himself, steeling his resolve. The chaos above ground was contained, but beneath the surface, a much larger mystery awaited, a secret that had been buried for centuries, waiting to be unearthed. As he prepared to descend into the darkness, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into a realm far beyond his understanding, a realm where the lines between reality and myth blurred, and the fate of Yellowstone hung in the balance. The scent of sulfur slowly faded from the air, replaced by the crisp, clean smell of pine. It had been a week since the eruption, a week since Elias Vance had attempted to awaken the Guardian. Yellowstone was healing, both physically and emotionally. The geysers had returned to their predictable rhythm. The ground had stilled, and the tourists were cautiously returning. But the park Suin and Rusty Finney would never be quite the same. The initial chaos had given way to a frenzy of investigation. The FBI, the National Park Service, and a team of anthropologists descended upon Yellowstone, determined to unravel the mystery of the Atsina Odi and the decades-long cover-up. Old files were dusted off, forgotten testimonies were revisited, and a harsh light was shown on the park's history. Rusty testified, his voice steady and unwavering, recounting the events in Obsidian Meadow. He omitted his connection to Sal DeMarco, but volunteered everything else, laying bare the truth about Vance, the ritual, and the attempted awakening. He knew he'd risked his career, but he couldn't remain silent. He owed it to his father, to the victims, and to the park itself. The internal investigation into the earlier cover-ups was swift and brutal. Several high-ranking park officials were suspended, facing scrutiny for their deliberate attempts to suppress the truth. The findings confirmed that the NPS had been aware of the strange occurrences decades ago, but had opted to bury them, fearing the potential damage to the park's reputation. But for Rusty, the greatest challenge wasn't facing the consequences of his actions or the fallout from the investigation. It was facing himself. The events in Obsidian Meadow had forced him to confront his demons, to acknowledge the darkness that had been festering within him for years. He sought help, attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings, sharing his story with others who understood the allure and the devastation of addiction. It was a slow, painful process, but he found solace in the shared vulnerability and the unwavering support of his fellow sufferers. He began to unravel the roots of his addiction, tracing it back to the trauma of his father's death, to the guilt and helplessness he'd felt as a child. He visited his father's grave, a simple stone marker overlooking a vast expanse of wilderness. He spoke to him, finally allowing himself to grieve, to express the emotions he'd suppressed for so long. "I understand now," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "You weren't just a ranger, you were a protector. And you died trying to protect this place." The hidden chamber in Obsidian Meadow remained a closely guarded secret. Officially, it was sealed, secured by a team of NPS investigators, but Rusty couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just a relic of a forgotten tribe. He continued to monitor the area, conducting secret patrols, listening for any sign of disturbance. He'd shared his concerns with Thorne, who agreed that the energy signature he'd detected was still present, dormant but potent. She'd secured limited access to the chamber, utilizing sensitive equipment to measure the residual energy levels. The readings were fluctuating, unpredictable. "It is like something is sleeping," Thorne said, her voice grave. "Waiting, I don't know what it is, but it is not gone." He'd also started to piece together Vance's research, meticulously documenting the Atsina Odi's beliefs, their rituals, and their connection to the geothermal activity of Yellowstone. The more he learned, the more he realized how little they truly understood about the park's hidden depths. One evening, a month after the eruption, Rusty found himself standing at the edge of the Yellowstone caldera. The vast expanse of the supervolcano stretched out before him, a landscape of steaming vents, bubbling mud pots, and shimmering thermal pools. The air was thick with the scent of sulfur, a constant reminder of the immense power lurking beneath the surface. He was supposed to be on a routine patrol, but he'd deliberately chosen this location, drawn by an irresistible pull. He gazed into the caldera, the sheer scale of it dwarfing everything around him. A testament to the raw, untamed power of nature, but it was also unsettling. He suddenly felt a sense of unease, a prickling on the back of his neck. He sensed a presence, something ancient and powerful, watching him from the depths. He remembered Thorne's warning. "It is not gone." He thought back to his father, to his unwavering dedication to the park, to his belief that Yellowstone held secrets that were best left undisturbed. He now understood his father's caution. He understood why he'd been so protective, so secretive. He'd always viewed Yellowstone as a place of beauty, a place of wonder. But now, he saw it as something more. It was a living, breathing entity, a complex and volatile ecosystem with a dark and mysterious past. He looked up at the sky, the stars twinkling in the clear night air. He felt a profound sense of humility, a recognition of his own insignificance in the face of such immense power. A subtle tremor ran through the ground beneath his feet. It was barely perceptible, but he felt it. A faint vibration, a tremor deep within the caldera. He scanned the landscape, searching for the source. Then he saw it, a small, isolated geyser, normally dormant. Emitting a plume of steam, it wasn't a normal eruption. It was a brief, hesitant burst, almost as if the geyser was testing the waters. Rusty stared at the geyser, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that this wasn't the end. It was just a sign, a warning. The land was settling, the immediate threat neutralized, but Yellowstone didn't give up its secrets easily. It was a place of perpetual change, of hidden forces, of ancient energies. The entity, the guardian, might be dormant, but it was still there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for an opportunity to awaken. He realized then that his work wasn't over. His father's work wasn't over. The protection of Yellowstone wasn't a one-time event. It was a perpetual vigilance, a continuous commitment. He took a deep breath, the crisp mountain air filling his lungs. He was no longer the man he'd been before. He was scarred, wounded, but also stronger, more resilient. He'd confronted his demons, embraced his past, and rediscovered his purpose. He turned and walked away from the caldera, his shoulders squared, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He knew that the echoes of the past would continue to resonate within the park, whispering secrets and hinting at future threats. But he was ready. He would stand guard, a silent sentinel, protecting Yellowstone from whatever darkness might emerge from beneath the surface. He knew, with a haunting certainty, that the land would test him again. And when it did, he would be ready.